Let us fight for a new world, a decent world that will give men a chance to work, that will give youth a future and old age a security. By the promise of these things, brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. They never will. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people.
Welcome to Rabble Rants. I'm Santiago Helo Quintero, and alongside Jesse McLean, we're going to unpack the stories that have us most riled up and challenge the narratives around them.
Welcome back, Anna. I've lost track of how many times you've been on here now. I'm always so grateful, especially you make it so easy. You're like, yep, sure, let's talk. So, yeah, obviously in Ontario and Canadian Labour is a stir right now. Let me just get the audience caught up to speed. Please tell me if I miss anything, because I'm super worked up about this, and we'll likely speed through it, assuming folks have heard, because if you haven't heard, I'm not sure why you're even watching the show. But Fred Hahn is the president of CUPE Ontario. He also sits on the executive of the CUPE National. This is an executive that was decided in May of this year.
A little earlier than May. And I'm going to go grab my vest. Give me one sec.
Anna's multitasking while she is fighting for a free Palestine, picking up Marshall's vest. She's spending time to talk to us. But Fred is being attacked. The national executive voted to motion of no confidence to have him removed or have him resign from the general vice president position that he holds, that he was elected to. And Anna will kind of talk about what that process is like and what this means for union democracy. But what is obvious to anybody who has been paying attention to the Palestinian solidarity movement is this attack on Fred is 100% tied to the attacks on the movement, regardless of what the CUPE national statement said. It's very reminiscent of tactics that we've seen used against many people in places of power who dare to speak for a free Palestine in an unapologetic way, not just simply couched in ceasefire language, but to actually advocate for Palestinian liberation and resistance, and the punishments that often go with those people. We've seen it time and time again, especially when it's especially jarring, I suppose, that it comes from within what we rely on in terms of progressive institutions. If you've been watching our show, you know that it's not a good idea to be relying on these institutions, and I'm sure a lot of people are finding that out. People have found that out with the NDP and the way that they've treated also Palestinian advocacy for years. So Fred Hahn has been defiant. You know, they're only trying to ask him to resign. He sent a message to his members saying that he was not going to do that he was denying the charges of anti-Semitism that they were leveling at him. If you folks go to social media, you can see the video that he shared that the national executive is trying to pin to this, but it's hard to imagine that they would remove somebody of Fred's stature, and considering the votes that he just received for this position, on simply a tweet. One has to imagine there's a lot of political background that we might be able to get from Anna, maybe not, but the vote suggests that 19-1 within the national executive, they all voted essentially but one to remove him. That is kind of shocking. I think not so much to find out that there's backstabbing going on within a union executive. I think it's just the level to which it happened. And I think when we get talking about it, we'll also talk about how coordinated it appeared to be with attacks coming from the Ontario government. I don't know how many times we've heard an Ontario premier call for the resignation of a provincial union leader, especially in such a large sector. I mean, these are the public sector workers, Canadian public sector workers. So it's a large union. I don't have the numbers, Anna might, but not just that, but the Minister of Labour also approached him. So all of these attacks coming on Fred at once. I cannot imagine being him right now. I mean, I've been in the position of something like this, but nothing like this. So Anna's back. We're going to pick her brain and see if we can make sense of all this. But and what do we do about it? So fucking Anna, like, where were you? Where were you when you found out? Like, did you know this was coming? Did members have any kind of hint of this? And you're not just a member. Maybe introduce yourself, I guess.
So I'm a member of CUPE, Local 3903, shout out. And I'm also a member of Labor for Palestine. So, like, as a local rank and file member, like, this came completely out of the blue. Not a single person heard about it, basically until that Star article dropped, right? And so, imagine being the people who elected this person to be your voice, to be your leader, and then have some national executive board that not all members are even in Ontario publicly announce to the world that they're, calling for Fred's resignation and giving him a vote of non-confidence, right? And so when we heard about it at Labor for Palestine, I think the GTA members, the CUPE members for sure, like, that was the time to kind of get together and start having these emergency meetings and see what's happening, right?
More emergency meetings. That's what you fucking need, right? More emergency meetings, more crises to put out. That's what, that on top of a lot of things, that's what makes me especially mad about this, is those leaders understand the battle that's going on right now and the distraction that this serves, as well as the blow, right? They can try to pretend that they issued a statement that distanced themselves from, don't worry, we swear it's not like the Israeli lobby or Ford or anything. Right. It's just that one tweet that made us try to get rid of Fred Hahn. And I think, like, you're underselling also who Fred Hahn is. Even, like, yes, he's the president. Right. Yes, he was elected to the board, but he means a lot to Labor for Palestine, right? Like, that must be one of the top champions you have within the labor movement.
Absolutely.
At least highly placed, right?
Yeah, and he, has been a fearless leader for Palestine. Again, as has CUPE Ontario for decades, right? Like, CUPE Ontario passed a BDS motion in 2006. And we passed, I think, 3 emergency Palestine resolutions at our last convention. And so, there's a reason why we've elected Fred into 2 positions, right? And, it's important, I think, if we're going to talk about, like, Fred's record here, not only has he been so vocal about Palestine, but trans rights, fighting the far right, migrants, like, all these key issues, he has stood against them, right? Publicly, more so than any politician or really any other labor leader in Ontario. And so, of course, they're coming for him, right? Because he's bringing people together under a banner of real safety and solidarity. And that is the biggest threat to Israel or the, people in power that there is, right?
I was saying while you were getting your Marshall vest that one of the things that make Fred stand out in this, because, CUPE National is reaffirming their position that they're still calling for a ceasefire and an end to the arms trade and all of those good things. But the one thing that Fred consistently does is reaffirm the right to Palestinian resistance. And he did so even on October 7th or 8th or whenever we all got word and responded, in that very complicated time. And I think, like, no one's ever really forgiven him for being so... I know he did apologize, but I still describe the way he speaks as unapologetic.
Yeah.
Meaning he doesn't always couch it in safe language.
That's true, right?
It's very principled stand, and that usually makes people in power kind of uncomfortable. They feel like they can't do it. You shouldn't be able to do it. It's like, yeah, but one has to imagine, like, there is a lot more politically at play than this tweet also, or even his stance on Palestine. Like, how could 19 of his people that, like, he's got to work, like, Candace Rennick used to be the vice president of CUPE Ontario.
They work together very closely.
I know she voted yes to ask him to resign when he already facing constant onslaught. So
Ridiculous.
Just to set the tone for people who have missed everything, this happened on the heels of him being accosted at some event. I apologize, I don't know what it was, but he's there and the Minister of Labor walks up, like they've got drinks, they're like mingling, all right? It's not a presser or anything. And he walks up at someone else's filming conveniently because he posts it to social media and just accosts the fuck out of Fred. Fred stands his ground and the people around him are kind of like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. This is kind of awkward and embarrassing. Those same people that didn't seem to know what to do have not said shit in media, because I'm really mad at a lot of CUPE people right now who haven't used their platform to say shit. I imagine like October 7th and a few notable times, it's become clear who's who.
Definitely.
Right? Is that shocking to you? Were you dealt a few blows here?
I mean, I think what was shocking to me is the National Executive Board. You know, like you say, so many of the folks on the National Executive claim to be, you know, strong advocates of Palestine. Some will stand there and wear a keffiyeh, right? But if you're not standing behind Fred, if you're voting for him to resign, or even if you're abstaining, you know who you are.
Aubrey.
Then, you know, what does it really mean to say that you're in solidarity? I think it's like James Baldwin said, right? I can't believe what you say because I see what you do. And you know, I think for folks that have worked so closely with him, to really stab him in the back is terrible. But on top of that, on top of any of the personal stuff, on top of any of the Palestine stuff, like the precedent that they're setting for what it means to have a democratically elected, you know, representative within a union is at stake in all of Canada right now, right?
Let's get into that a little bit, because you're talking about the fact that he was elected at a convention and
two conventions.
At two conventions and an executive
since October.
Yeah, an executive board is taking that away. Now, coming from an NDP background, this is par for the course in how some of these institutions are structured. And I am not excusing it for one fucking second, right? Because I have no time for it. It is, but, you know, I'm going to go and I'm going to answer, or you're going to help me answer the detractors that are all over the goddamn internet talking about how, conventions aren't really the rank and file, that they're paid delegates, and that essentially it doesn't mean much that he was elected. Do you want to answer to those folks, or maybe give an idea of how the rank and file generally feel about Fred? Because it's hard for someone from the outside now getting the wrong voices amplified in this moment, right? Obviously, there's some locals coming out with some really shitty statements.
Yeah.
And they're getting blown up, right? Because that is explosive. So they're outnumbering the 3903, the 3902, and all the other, you know, hopefully CUPE 905 and whatnot are out there doing the right thing. But want to speak of what Fred means to CUPE rank and file?
Yeah. And, you know, let's be clear, delegates who go to a convention are rank and file members that have, for the most part, been nominated or elected or been put in this position by their fellow rank and file members to go represent them. Like I was in May when I voted for Fred to be the president of Ontario, I don't know, like a sixth time or something. And so, you know, it's important to recognize that as we're seeing in CUPE National, there's a big difference between how executives feel about things, those in power, those who are actually getting paid by the union to chill, versus the rank and file members who scramble for every penny that we get, that Ford is trying to take away from us, who apparently loves CUPE National right now. And it's the membership who has continued to elect Fred, who has continued to stand behind Fred. The Labor for Palestine email action is something like 70,000 emails sent, right? And so,
this just happened yesterday, okay? Just to give people an idea of that mobilization.
Yeah, so I mean, I can understand that there's 80 Jewish members of CUPE that are suing, and there's 19 executive board members that are unhappy with Fred. But when there's 70,000 emails sent by rank and file members, and there's all these locals that are coming out with statements saying that they support Fred, not only are we saying that we support Fred, but we're saying we support the will of our rank and file membership who pursued the stated democratic process to put him in those positions to speak for us.
Well, after his stance on Palestine was known.
Absolutely.
That video could have certainly been better done. But I think in the end he deleted it and made that clear that he still thinks it's ridiculous Israel was in the Olympics, and that is a valid fucking point to be able to make. But he could have possibly chosen a better medium to send that message. But to have, what's her name? Her name's Karen. I thought, I didn't want to go there, but that's how I'm remembering her name's Ranaletta?
Candace Rennick?
No, Candace Rennick, the person who moved the motion. I'm not going to get this wrong, people. Karen Ranaletta. And if I say your name wrong, I don't care. From CUPE, BC is the one who moved this motion. So she thought in the midst of all the stuff that's going on in the world and that's facing workers, like fucking back to work legislation from the liberals and shit, that she was going to draft a no confidence motion. I'm sure like in a complete vacuum, not in coordination with any other backstabbing shits, and submit it. And the executive would meet, and then like almost unanimously, like Yolanda was the only one with a backbone. Like, this seemed really coordinated. I know they don't want to say that it was, but it's at the same time he comes under like unprecedented attack from the Ontario government.
Absolutely.
They called him a disgusting human being, not the union, but like Doug Ford holds a presser and calls him a bully and a disgusting human being. And then the union's like, now would be a really good time to drop this, don't you think? Like that, this is, and everyone's like, oh, well, Fred should prioritize workers and bettering the working conditions and pay and focus on worker issues. And you and I have talked at length, and I will like point people to the episode. So, or we should maybe explain again, take time to explain why Palestine is a labor issue.
Absolutely.
But these same people who think he's not focused on workers' issues are okay with their executive taking time and energy to do this.
Yeah. And I mean, the amount of like Zionist pressure on and influence on the labor union that this shows is pretty ridiculous to see from people who are the same ones that are saying, focus on domestic labor issues, right?
Yeah.
So it's just ridiculous. As though, there's not tons of workers here who are from these countries specifically because of the conditions that we've created, who are not wanting their labor to go to killing children, and who have watched what the labor unions in Canada did during South Africa and want to do the same, right?
I mean, some of the statements, too, that are, like, calling it divisive, that he's not constantly unifying the membership, I think erases not only the role of unions, but the role of, like, leadership, too.
Absolutely.
You have to be able to ruffle feathers and just know that some people are going to have to come along or not, but you have to be on the right side. It's not about placating everyone around you. That's how you get really poor leaders, right? Who just try this mediocre approach that really doesn't upset anybody, but it also doesn't deliver anything at all. I know you have gone over it many times, but absolutely, I think to the folks out there, can you explain as best you can why labor should be worried about Palestine? Because, even when you show people the statement from Palestinian workers and evidence that there's been a call that folks are answering, the bots obviously refuse, but there's genuine people out there. There's no way, man, that it's the job of an Ontario union to do foreign policy.
Right? Yeah, and I think that's just such a silly way to look at it. I think the first place to start, I think, is definitely, the call you just mentioned, which came from labor unions and labor leaders within Palestine to their, brother and sister labor organizations around the world to stop arming genocide, to stop supporting genocide, is so key, right? And that call highlights the way that the labor union in Canada is part of a global system of capital, right? And as anyone who's been paying attention to the mass amounts of arms blockades and weapons blockades that have happened in Canada and the US and around the world, we know that a huge part of not only labor in Canada, but also money from Canadian workers, money from the Canadian government, money from the Canadian pension plan is going to fund these bombs. So I don't know about, the bots online or the folks listening, but the last thing I want to do to pay my rent is contribute to the death of babies in Gaza. And so for me, even not being in a manufacturing sector, but being somewhere where my pension investments, my funding investments are going to support this, that's a Canadian issue. That's a labor issue. And, for me, when I think about the unique role of labor, particularly in South African apartheid, where, it was postal workers who refused to deliver South African mail. It was grocery workers who refused to carry and stock South African produce. That is so unique to workers, and only we have the ability to pull those strings. And it's also a great reminder to Canada that we are the backbone of this economy, and we have the power to say what we do and don't want our labor going to, right?
Absolutely. And folks need to remember, just in terms of logistics, why it would be a union problem. Well, maybe you don't agree that you got to do something about a fucking genocide, right? And sitting at home by yourself, you're really not going to be all that effective. So if we could just start on those agreed terms, then what would be the most effective way to reach as many people as possible? Well, we created networks of workers. We called them unions. They have mailing lists. If you're just going to talk about in terms of being able to reach people, they know where they are. They know where they work. They even know where they live and how to reach them and how to encourage them to mobilize. And, it's not just an email list. It's relationships that have been built through the workplace and through organizing already for Palestine. And we look to tenant unions for different purposes. I mean, every network you have right now has been mobilized to this end. So to find it strange that the largest networks that we have at our disposal would go to this super pressing emergent need seems a little bit clueless to how organizing works. Or perhaps you're just happy with the status quo. Then I don't really know where to go with you. But I mean, if you think that there's change to be made, then the unions become responsible for a lot. We've talked about here how unions should find it their responsibility to fight for a whole lot. And it seems overwhelming, especially when you can't seem to get even your collective bargaining rights respected. Right? You're spread thin. We get that, but also genocide. So we've prioritized this. For the moment, I'm sorry. And to be fair, there's still very pressing workers' issues that I'm sure Fred would much prefer to be working on than having to defend himself against this onslaught. I understand he has not resigned, not even from the executive board, to my knowledge. I can only imagine what the fuck that next meeting is going to be like. Like, I'm sorry
Maybe
for
a little
laughing,
awkward.
Fred. Like, seems so awkward. Like, him and Yolanda just gonna march in there and burn it down. Like, what happens next? Can the membership force the executive in any way? You must be organizing and racking your brains on next moves. Or do we just pretend that didn't happen? Fred stays in his job and those people feel pretty ineffective right now.
I mean, I think public pressure is so key right now. And we can tell that the executive is feeling it, right? Because they're coming out against the
I hope so. I'm tagging them.
yeah, right? And they're feeling that. They're coming out against the statements of support by Doug Ford. You know, they're trying to distance themselves from the controversy. And that's because, again, they're getting 70,000 emails. I was on a Zap organized by Spring Magazine last night. We made calls. I let Mark and Candace know exactly how I felt, you know? And I'm not the only one. I think...
Did you leave a voicemail?
They wouldn't let me.
Do you have handlers? You have handlers, Anna?
The voicemail. Mr. Hancock, disabled his voicemail because...
Oh, I thought maybe you had people talking you down from the ledge, you know? Like, maybe just send an email or a text message.
No, he clearly doesn't want to hear from, the people he purports to represent, you know? But they're clearly feeling that pressure, and it's working, and that's why we need to keep it up and amplify it, right? I think it's important to recognize that, like, the National Executive Board's statement is just that, a statement. And it's a statement because they don't have any real power aside from, publicly shaming Fred and really, like, delegitimizing him as a leader, right? And so I think it's on us as a membership to remind those 19 people who sit in an office, save for Yolanda, shocking the only racialized woman, voted no. But remind them what it means to be in a union that's supposed to represent tens of thousands of workers and not the will of the Ford government, you know?
Well, I'll link the CUPE National Board info page here, as well as maybe one of the email templates that many organizations have been pushing around. I mean, Lead Now, all the usual suspects. But again, I come back to this shit of being distracted from the task at hand. And I'm sure Fred is absolutely horrified that people are having to spend their energy on this right now. Don't you think, like, if
Absolutely.
You perhaps know him better than I, but I would be mortified that exhausted Palestinian solidarity activists are having emergency meetings because my comrades stabbed me in the back.
It's terrible. And, beyond that, like, I want to shout out the rail blockade the rail strike that was just forced into arbitration, right?
A lockout. They locked them out.
By the same government that's applauding CUPE, right? And so when we could be focusing on solidarity with real labor issues in Canada that apparently people want us to focus on, or, the massive slaughter of Palestinians, instead, I'm being kept up at night writing statements about why Israel is more anti-Semitic than Fred Hahn.
I mean, to be fair, they're the ones drawing the Star of David on the fucking bombs that they're dropping and then, getting personally offended by this video.
I know. How could people get confused?
But these are such usual tactics. The fact, I think, that labor leaders fell for it or are feeding into it. Like, it's the worst when it comes from this side because it gives such a green light, opening it up, validating it for our detractors. It's such a double whammy and a triple whammy if you've had to work with them. And then, them trying to say that they still stand for Palestinian liberation, but only when it's super comfortable to do so. Yeah, I hope this doesn't detract too much. And like you said, it's just a statement. Fred just needs to keep looking forward, right? Always shoot down range. I had the rifle club on, and that was like the mantra I took from them. Just keep focused. Do not look down to the sides.
Absolutely. And I think it goes back to what you tweeted yesterday. I saw, like, as much as labor attempts to, like, get close to power, be thought of as, like, this mainstream voice, the second that someone breaks rank, the second that someone says something too radical, they get put out to dry, right? And so why even, waste our time with that sort of bullshit when it's so clear that it's the grassroots movement, again, of the rank and file of the people that are making things happen, right?
Yes. I know from personal experience that this will be freeing in the end for Fred. He now knows who he can trust, who he cannot trust, and as always, it will be your grassroots supporters that you will be able to count on to do any kind of work that when it's risky.
100.
When it really fucking counts. So I know it's hard for people at the top to do that all the time because they have to make relationships up there to fucking survive. But it's got to be incredibly stifling because in the end, he was amongst 19 pieces of shit this whole time, right? You want to know that. Like, that's unforgivable. There is some shit that you decided to pull during this time that are just unforgivable to me. And I am not a CUPE member, so I very much appreciate you coming on as a CUPE member. But obviously, like, my thoughts were especially to you and Fred, like, because of the work that's already having been done inside CUPE for Palestine. And does this make it more difficult for you to navigate now? Or is this a fire that you guys can feed off of?
I hope this is a fire that we can feed off of. Again, like, since 2005 plus, CUPE Ontario has been doing this work. And since 2005 plus, there have been detractors trying to break up the solidarity, right? And so let it, radicalize you rather than deprive us of hope, right?
I think we'll leave it at that, Anna. Do you feel like do you have anything we've left unsaid?
Solidarity with Fred.
I think it's I stand with Fred. Hashtag
I stand with Fred.
Thank you, Anna, as always, for your time and your advocacy. I wish you didn't have to spend your time on this shit, though. You need some rest.
Appreciate you.
All right. Thanks for letting us rant. If you liked it, share it. If you want to know more, check out the show notes. Whatever you do, keep on disrupting.